The next young lady is a young lady I've been working with for quite a number of years. I have great faith in Jenny. She does some really good work. She's going to talk to you about riparian working group and riparian threat assessment analysis she's been doing. And help me welcome Jenny Coleshill.
Good afternoon, fellow water lovers of the boundary. And it's great to be here today, and I'm honored to speak to you all. This is such a great event every year. I love coming. So I'm here to tell you about a project we're undertaking alongside with the Watershed plan, a riparian threat assessment of the entire Kettle River watershed. We're pretty lucky here as we are right now. I don't know if anybody's seen where they tube in the Okanagan. Oh my God. It's horrible. Don't tell them what we have. Okay. So just a bit of outline of the presentation. I'll give you a bit of background and how we got to this project. I'll tell you about the riparian working group that we have struck. And I'll tell you about why we care about riparian areas so much. And then I'll go into the details of the assessment and about the data we've collected and the analysis and the riparian model that's being developed. So, as Graham just said, the regional district's been leading the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan for the last few years. Out of the technical background report, it identified a lack of information on riparian condition throughout the watershed. And through the planning phase, we're in need of information about riparian areas, and it'll help to inform decision making. And in the public survey as well that went out, there was a high recognition of the value of healthy riparian areas in the watershed. This is just a picture of the website that Graham runs so awesomely. If you haven't been there, you definitely have to visit it. Tons of info. So the riparian working group, we thought it would be a great idea to get the brilliant minds together who know things about riparian areas, from biology aspect, policy, politics, and economical as well. So the group has met a few times now, and they're going to help direct research and policy making around riparian areas. So the group consists of local government, which is pretty much Grace McGregor, Boundary Invasive Species Society, Barb Stewart, the Christina Lake Stewardship Society, and Granby Wilderness Society, Canadian Wildlife Service, a migratory bird conservation expert, Ministry of Forest Lands Natural Resource Operations, Lisa Tedesco, habitat biologist, and also an ecosystem restoration specialist, Michael White, comes to meetings too. The regional district planners, Mark Anderson, and of course Graham Watt, our watershed planner. Professional foresters, Interfor, and other groups that we've been trying to engage, like the Cattlemen's Association, though they are very busy folks, so we haven't been super successful in that. So just a little bit about why riparian areas, why we care so much. As someone in the conservation field, really the biggest bang for your buck if you're going to conserve something, let it be riparian areas. They provide a range of services to society. They're less than 1% of the land mass in North America, and they are able to support more avian species, bird species, than all other habitats combined. Our riparian areas here are mostly the black cottonwood ecosystem, and they're among the rarest ecosystems in the province, and that's why they're considered a red-listed ecosystem. And now they're reduced to fragments throughout their range. So this is a picture of my hubby with a rainbow trout. I'm not telling you where though. But our fish definitely depend on these healthy riparian areas. And people still don't quite get it, that they're so important. I did block out the house, not to implicate anybody, so you can't see whose house it was. But I do know this property. It used to be my best friend's family's property, and it used to have a beautiful cottonwood stand all along the shoreline, and now it's completely gone. So riparian areas do offer multiple ecosystem services and goods. It's just a table here I put. So erosion control, mitigation of floods, droughts, nutrient cycling, help to regulate temperature in the rivers, streams, water and air purification, water storage and release, fish and wildlife habitat, and areas for recreational, spiritual, and aesthetic opportunities and water supply. Some indicators of stress in riparian areas can be seen by reduced biodiversity and altered productivity, prevalence of disease, increased dominance of exotic species, which we heard so much about this morning. And some of the reasons this could happen is direct responses to altered flow regimes that govern the water availability and disturbance magnitude, and then the frequency and changes in the sediment supply from upstream channels and upslope as well. So this is Graham looking at some erosion problems along the Kettle River. He's very distressed. Yeah.
It's falling apart is what I was saying.
It's falling apart. It's some current vegetation was taken out, and the erosion that's happened since in a very short period of time is quite extreme.
Do we know which slot that is?
They were there taking part.
It's City Park in Granby. So to get into the threat assessment, the goal is to provide a clear picture of the status of riparian areas throughout the watershed. And the purpose is to quantify landscape and site level threats to the features, functions, and conditions of riparian areas. So that's a nice picture of the Granby watershed in the provincial park, quite undisturbed and intact. Of course, it's a park. So some of the key questions that we're going to try and answer are, what are the threats and vulnerabilities? What is the land status and use of riparian areas throughout the watershed? What conditions are riparian areas in throughout the watershed, and how much of the land base has been affected by such disturbances like mountain pine beetle? And what are the priority areas for conservation, restoration, and stewardship? So there's two approaches we're going to take, or we're taking in this analysis. First is a coarse scale assessment, and then a fine scale assessment. So the coarse scale assessment involves using a GIS system, which we love, and identifying surrogates that we can use for the GIS data, and we'll be looking at main stem rivers, tributaries, lakes, and wetlands. That's a picture on the top right of a picture taken from our ArcMap program, and shows a few of the different layers that we can put on for analysis, and then there's a bunch of awesome tools that we can use. There's streams, roads, and the protected area Gladstone, and all the freshwater atlas data. And then this summer, we're going to actually get on the ground out there and do some on-the-ground riparian assessments to get some more details from that.
Piloted by two students we have.
Yes, so this is in City Park. I'm going to touch on this a bit more too, but so this is us in the bottom doing a riparian assessment with some Brazilian students that came to work with the City Grand Forks, but I'm going to touch on that in a bit as well.
Good.
Yes.
We're doing something about it.
Yes, we sure are. Yeah. So to get into some of the data that we have collected for this analysis, as I said, from the freshwater atlas, the water data, so the rivers and tributaries, lakes, and wetlands. There was a survey done for wetlands for spadefoot toads here a few years ago that the Ministry of Environment. So we have a little bit more data on the wetlands than other places. We're kind of lucky. We'll look at habitat types, so the biogeoclimatic zones, the land status, So zoning, public versus private, protected areas, land uses and land tenures, forestry developments, i.e. clear cuts, mountain pine beetle management, the resource roads, Ministry of Transportation, public roads, railway lines, recreational trails and areas, dikes that are used for flood protection, terrain stability mapping, and an important one is representation of riparian areas. So that's just showing all the cumulative effects. You can't point the finger at one person or one thing going on. There's multiple things happening that all add up. So I'm going to get Lisa to talk a little bit to these next few slides, but one of the cool things coming out of this project is that as a riparian model that the ministry is working on, and it's almost done. There's a draft form, there's just a couple slides that show you what this model is going to look like, because currently we don't really have a good model to represent riparian areas. So, quick.
So I'm back. So there are some existing, so the challenges with identifying the riparian area, there's a few different models. There's some really simple ones. You put a buffer on everything. But that's not very representative of what you actually find on the ground. And you can do a smaller buffer on a smaller stream and a bigger buffer on a river, but you're still kind of just throwing lines on a map. We do have some ecosystem mapping within the province that gets things down to kind of a habitat type. So is it a wet forest or a dry forest? And that's not bad, but it's also not great. So there was a project done in the Robson Valley, so up kind of east of Prince George, Mount Robson Valley, and it combines a lot of different pieces of information to try and give us a better picture of riparian. So we will still be using some of those existing information, like the freshwater atlas, where we know or where we think the rivers and streams are, because sometimes they move or they get moved. The existing information we have on ecosystems, and then this piece, which is it's basically a wetness model. So they take things, and I don't do all the GIS work. I tell them what I want done and they do it for me. Slope, the size of a catchment basin, the position on a slope, and how much flow, to give you an idea of how wet an area would be. So in this map, the darker blue and the more blue, the wetter it is. The lighter color, the drier it would be. So it gives us a representation of what our catchment basins are and what is likely to support riparian habitats on our landscape. So when we combine this with the other information that we have, like those streams, like the existing ecosystem information, and then also one thing we're going to work on is doing buffers but incorporating slope into that, you start to get a pretty good representation. So this is the north end of Christina Lake, and you can see that our wetness model lines up pretty well with what we have. So that's an air photo underneath. And this is Saddle Lake, which again, it's another place where you get a pretty good representation of what's on the landscape. So we have places where this model is working quite well, and when we combine all this information, we'll kind of smooth the lines out and have a pretty good sense of riparian. We get other places where you get some kind of funny stuff, like completely dry, but it also shows, so I'm just gonna kind of point. This is around the community center, the arts center. That should be wetland, based on slope, and it's not. It was. So the interesting thing about this model is it tells you what the land could or should look like if we weren't necessarily interfering with some of the slope information. So I thought that was a pretty neat one, because that's not, and then Grand Forks was also pretty interesting. Based on slopes and flows and catchment areas, look at all the blue in Grand Forks.
It was all marsh.
Yeah, so the other thing, so it'll help verify what we know is on the landscape, but when we start talking about things like prioritization for restoration, conservation, and stewardship, it can help us identify areas that would likely support a healthy wetland habitat and then there's other places where it just does funky stuff, and we gotta work on that, because we don't know why those blobs are blue. Graham's putting his hand up.
Two quick comments. One, of course, the resolution of the digitalization model is a bit coarse.
Yes.
If somebody wants to give us LiDAR, I think that would probably generate a few months of computing time for the GIS folks, but give us a much better model. The other thing is, and I was curious, how is soil texture taken into consideration? Because down where I live on the Carson area there, it's not, there's no wetlands there.
Yeah, not yet, but that's one of the other pieces. So from this, basically this information will get incorporated into a larger model where it takes into consideration things like, oh, it's bedrock, or it's porous soils, or that sort of stuff. And I may draw on your amazing knowledge to help us do that.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so from all this information gathering and analysis, some of the products and results that we're going to have, we'll generate some maps with a variety of indicators used to evaluate watershed impacts. We'll look at the proportion of the watershed that's in protected areas, urban areas, and agriculture, timber, all the different land uses. We'll look at various measures that are associated with roads and trails, such as road density and the number of road stream crossings. This picture is just a little bit more zoomed in of what Graham had. The red dots are where roads and streams cross. And the preliminary analysis, yes, 9,000 stream crossings and 14,000 kilometers of roads. A couple of weeks ago I was at a conference, and Patrick Daigle, he used to be with the Ministry of Environment. Yeah, he has done some number crunching and with the number of roads in the province and how fast we're working at remediating them and fixing them. It's going to take us 3,000 years. So some of the outcomes will be to provide baseline information on the current conditions, provide spatial layers, including the riparian model, which I'm sure some people in this room might find handy, and identifying major landscape threats to riparian areas, prioritize areas for restoration and stewardship, provide the input on major threats for consideration by the watershed plan, select reference sites for restoration. This is really important to know what to restore back to. It'll enable us for the stratified sampling for our field assessment. And also remembering and linking the watershed plan back to restoration and protection. The BC Wildlife Federation in the Lower Mainland is in their watershed plan, and they're asking for 100% retention of wetlands plus a 10% increase. So we can't quantify everything, all the threats out there in the landscape. I'm just going to pick on a little few things right now. But this is in the cemetery in the city of Grand Forks. A bunch of wood was chipped up and it's dumped over the side into the Johnson Flats wetland, which it'll end up into. And it'll, of course, prevent vegetation, riparian vegetation from growing. But this type of thing is hard to quantify. Some land use practices. Another house blotted out so you can't see. But private property is a big problem too. People who dump their lawn clippings and stuff into the riparian area, so easy for the river to take it away in the spring, right?
Is that the Granby?
It's the Kettle, actually. Yeah, it's the Kettle. Yeah, some more lawn clippings. Burning and using the river for a fire break. That's good. And riprap. I guess you could almost quantify riprap for GIS. It's kind of a project in itself, but I just wanted to include it. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine.
That's down on Marsh, down on the Okanagan.
Yes, yes.
I did that.
Did you? Yeah. No riparian vegetation growing back here.
Was either that or loose farms.
Yeah, it's really tough. It's really tough. But the downstream neighbors will not be happy because it increases flow, which increases erosion, and there's always downstream effects.
And actually, we already have documentation of those downstream effects from our May tour. We're cutting into the bank
Right.
after that section.
Actually, that's what was happening right there. There was a back eddy right there, and had we not done that bank along there for probably 150 meters, we would have lost
Hadley Meadows Road.
quite a few, well, not just road farms.
Yeah, lots of property. There's one property owner in the Kettle who's lost 7 acres of farmland in the
That's
past
further,
couple of
that's
years.
way further down though. Yeah, that's right on that tip that you see down there further.
Yeah,
Yeah.
How many acres, Jay?
7 acres.
7.
Yes. Yeah, this isn't in the Grand Forks area, it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
This is MCON washing the bridge into the river.
No deleterious material there.
No, but sediment. I have discussed this one with Stephanie already. I did warn her I was gonna pick on MCON a little bit. But I noticed this in the spring, MCON, they clean up our ditches along the highways. And they put it into the dump truck, and I noticed they dumped their pile of sand over the bank. This is on the Highway 3 going up to the Paulson. And this was just a few months later, the erosion that's happened through that big pile of dump truck load that was dumped over the side of the bank. And here's another view of it. And there's McCrae Creek right below. So all that sediment and salt and sand is going to end up in McCrae Creek.
Is there no way that sand could be recycled and used again from the year, like dumping it at an aggregate site or
No,
something?
it's not feasible. When you're out there doing this pickup room sweeper, you're so far away from anything. And they usually just lay it out on the edge and then they'll grade it back into the shoulders. Usually that's what they do. Too costly to haul it anywhere. It's such a small amount for a long distance, but that is not good. If they're dumping over an exposed bank and going into a river, no.
Yeah. This isn't, I couldn't capture this really, but this is up E Holt Road. We're at a stream, there's a culvert right there and a stream, and you can kind of see on the right-hand side of the road in the upslope. They did some road grading there, and half of the road was graded into loose sediment that ended up right upslope from the culvert. So the first rain event that happened brought all that sediment down into the culvert, and that poses culvert problems and more road maintenance problems. So to carry on, so this summer we were working with the City of Grand Forks, and they were able to have some Brazilian intern students that were some grade two ladies, and they did some work with us. They mapped a 50-meter buffer area around the Granby and Kettle River in the City of Grand Forks and designated different land covers. So now we have an idea of the different land covers in the riparian areas, and now we can look at what the highest proportion are and maybe what areas are to protect and do stewardship on. So that was a great project and a great contribution from the City of Grand Forks. We're also doing some historical comparisons as well. This is an air photo from in Grand Forks from 1946, I believe, and in the top there you can see Smelter Lake, which once existed. Yeah, so we'll do some digitizing of riparian areas and just see the differences and how much we've impacted them or not. In some areas they might have improved since this time.
Where's Ward Lake on there? Do we see it right now?
There's Ward Lake.
And then Saddle's just at the left corner.
Yeah, there's Saddle Lake. Yeah. Ward Lake's in good shape right now. So this summer we also were able to do a boat tour with Brad Siemens, who lent us his boat time, and he was a great operator. So me and Graham and Brad, and also Les Johnson, thank you, back here. He lended us his GoPro camera, and we recorded the riparian area we started in the City of Grand Forks, we went to the Carson border, then we went all the way down to Cascade Falls, back again. So we were able to record both sides of the river, and then we went up to 17 Mile Bridge and recorded one side of the Granby River. So that'll be awesome. It's a good baseline inventory you can also use it for future comparisons and for video analysis as well. So Dave, if you need any comparisons from 2013. Yeah. And off just to acknowledge some funders for this project, the Southern Interior Beetle Action Coalition, the Regional District of the Kootenay Boundary and the Village of Midway, and some great in-kind support from the many people of the Riparian Working Group, the ministry, and the City of Grand Forks and Selkirk Geospatial Research Center in Castlegar. So thank you.
Any questions for Jenny? This is a really good project. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned Ward Lake. What do you mean that it's in good shape?
It's a high water table right now, and it's hasn't disappeared in the last 2 years, which it was prior to that.
And is it just from our runoff, or has there been some mitigations there?
Me and Graham have discussed this lots, and we believe that the heavy spring rains have probably raised the water table and helped to contribute to that. I also did hear a rumor that Larry Jermayoff hiked up somewhere and re-diverted some creek, but I haven't been able to confirm that yet. No, Graham's saying no. Don't take that to the bank.
Ward Lake was looked at 20 years ago by hydrologists out of Nelson, and the creek north of that has been diverted. It just takes the scuff of your foot to divert the creek that comes down to Ward Lake.
Yeah.
So it's a private landowner.
It would also be an issue if the diversion was put in place and you had a high water table year like we have currently, and you couldn't stop water to put it back. We've seen cases in the prairies where you have a well-meaning restoration that floods 10 acres of land or...
Ward Lake's pretty obvious. If you go up there, the people that live on the north side of just over a little hump there, they've diverted it. It's got ditches running all the time. So that's something that really needs some work. Because it used to have lots of water in it and lots of birds.
There's more houses there now.
That too, yeah.
Terry, do you have a question?
Well, yes, there is already provincial legislation in place, isn't there, Jenny, that protects boundaries of streams and waterways?
Where salmon exist, there is riparian area regulations.
Okay, so it's just where salmon exists.
There's a lot more to it.
Okay, there's more.
There's a lot. It's
The base-
complicated. It's complicated, but no, actually not that complicated, right? So there's a Water Act. So works in or about a stream also include the vegetation that would be part of that stream habitat, right? So that's Section 9 of the Water Act. There's some fish protection act as well provincially, and there's a few other things provincially that actually, environmental management relating to pollution, that kind of thing. Federally, it's still even after the changes at DFO and Fisheries Act, there's still all the kind of things that would have been illegal before would still, at least for the Kettle River, because of the sport fishery, and many other rivers, would still be illegal and actually carry higher fines. I think how it will be played out will need some interpretation in the courts, is my understanding, but
There's also logging practices.
and there's logging practices, there's many.
Streams and
Yeah.
classification is
Yeah, that's right.
Their setback rules.
Yeah, there's floodplain rules for development around things, but in terms of the riparian area regulation, that's something that only applies to certain municipalities, generally where there's been salmon. So it's one set of tools that is available in some municipalities that aren't here.
But if
Yeah,
I could
that's
just
not
ask,
our area.
if I could just ask a follow-up to that, then, did you not say then, Jenny, that the riparian vegetation in certain areas along the Kettle, you mentioned the black cottonwood, is considered to be endangered, and that is also protected in yet another way?
No,
No?
there's no real solid protection for riparian habitats. Particularly if it's on private land, just because it's a species at risk. If it's on private land, there's no jurisdiction for managing things that are at risk, whether federally or provincially on private lands. And the riparian habitats really fall into a bit of a gray zone under a lot of the legislations in terms of things like having to be, riparian habitat is considered to be fish habitat. We all understand that those habitats contribute to the value of those fisheries, but to prove that in court, that the removal of riparian vegetation has caused irreparable damage to fish habitat is very, very challenging, and that's the trick. Does that sound okay, Dave?
Right?
You didn't go off the rails too far there.
Right?
It's a, yeah.
Well, believe it or not, around Christina Lake, there are still man-made structures like retaining walls being built between the low water and the high water. So when the high water comes, the retaining wall is sitting in the water.
There's a lot more to that story too, so we probably won't get into that completely. There are reasons for some things. Okay, so time to wrap it up, right?
Well, yes, and but I'd like to get the directors to all stand up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Okay,
say.
yeah.
Could all the directors of the stewardship please rise, levez-vous. Please, 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 yes. You know, really, the amount of work that these folks do, Brenda along with them, is just unbelievable, and we should all be so, so proud. I get people asking me questions all the time, you know, how did Christina Lake manage to do this, what are you doing? And to a degree, people are very envious of what we have going on here. And so they should be, and Brenda has helped others do the same thing. So I want to thank all of you for coming out. Are there any other questions you would like to direct before we totally wrap this up? And remember, directors of the stewardship, you can go nowhere. You have a meeting. Richard.
Were we gonna hear a bit more about the weevils?
Oh, Weevils, okay. Well, sitting right there is Kara Adrian, who walked in, and Kara is our student that has been doing work on Weevils. I just talked to Kara, asked her if her work was complete yet. She said no, she hadn't had her findings put together yet, but I will tell you where we're at with the province. Al Stanley's also there, and you can talk to him about that. Where we're at with the province is, once again, hurry up and wait. We have had, finally, some emails back and forth, and they have acknowledged that they know what we're asking for. They're not sure of where they're going with it yet. They formed a group. They're looking at how they think about our biological answer, possibly, to weevils. So, the latest is Val, I forget her last name, has said, yeah, right, she's going to have another meeting, and we should have heard, I think 3 weeks ago, however, we're still waiting for the end result on what Val and her group thinks we should do with our milfoil weevil. So when we know, you'll be the first to know too, because quite frankly, it's really frustrating. Anyway, it's something new to them, and it goes around and round and round and round. Different people get involved, and now we've got Val, so hopefully we'll get an answer to this situation sooner than later. I am really happy that Andy's group is doing what they're doing, because we have not slowed down while we're looking at the weevil for the large infested area down in the south end. So know that we will continue doing what we're doing right now, because it's totally important, okay? Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much everybody for coming. This is a fantastic turnout as usual, and really, really, really worthwhile. So tell all your neighbors they missed a darn good day, a fantastic lunch, and some really good information. Thanks.